Hey, and welcome to Beyond the Session, the show where you get to hear shop talk between therapists. As usual, I've asked my friend ChatGPT to come up with a tagline for our show, and it said, ready for some real talk? Dive into the minds of therapists as they dish out the raw truth that doesn't even make sense. I don't think AI speaks human. What do you think?
Well, I think it's funny to use them because then you can bounce back afterwards with something a little more human.
Exactly. And that's the whole reason that I use ChatGPT in the intro, is to demonstrate that artificial intelligence is no replacement for real intelligence.
Yet.
Not yet, anyways. Maybe in another year or two. I'm in the studio today with Lindsay Sang, who is the owner and operator of Reset Counseling and Psychotherapy in Barrie, Ontario. And it's Parenting Perspectives Part 2, and it's how to support children facing mental health challenges. So, you ready for this?
I am ready for it in the sense that I think these questions do come up, but I don't think there's easy answers for them. So we'll see how our conversation goes.
Yep, sounds good. In part 1, we were talking about some foundations for mental health in the household and how to create healthy communication about emotions and about mental health in our household with our children. And today, what we're trying to do, at least, is helping to understand when our child might be struggling with their mental health, how can we approach that as parents, how we can cope with that as parents, and what kind of supports might be helpful to us, and what kind of resources might be available even when we're going through the really tough stuff with our kids. What would be some red flags for you when your clients who are adults are talking about their kids and some behaviors that might be happening? Would there be times when you might suggest to clients reaching out for more help?
It's not a simple answer, I think, because on one hand, I really don't like or want people to be overdiagnosed.
Yeah.
And especially if kids, they can hear it and use it as a crutch.
Yeah.
Right. And then now they always come back to, well, I'm not getting up because I'm a depressed person. Right. That's the danger of it for me.
Yeah.
But the positive of, diagnosing is that if there's a real problem, you can now find the proper help for it. Right. So yeah, again, it depends on the age of the child, the maturity. So it's not an easy answer. Red flags, the things that a general rule of thumb is that if you're seeing persisting symptoms for more than 2 weeks, then it could be something.
Yeah.
Okay. So if your child is really down in the slumps, unmotivated, they are consistently tired, their diet is changing, you can tell that they're moving slower or getting agitated easily. Maybe they're just a teenager.
Right.
Right. But usually those kind of moods can come and go for up to 2 weeks, right? Up to 2 weeks, it might stay that way. And then they start getting better again as they self-regulate. Or if they're getting good support, right? But if you're finding that it's persisting beyond that, then there's a potential there.
Yeah.
To look into getting some extra assessment or help or someone to talk with. I think one more thing on a more extreme scale is like there would be things like psychosis where they're starting to hear voices and they are paranoid, or extreme OCD or self-harm behaviors. Then those would be the ones that you definitely wouldn't want to just try to tackle by yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we talked about this a bit in part 1. Andy was mentioning some resources to support positive parenting, going to parenting classes and things. But some of the same organization that offer those resources, they also have crisis support. And those teams, it's not only they obviously have help when you're in a crisis situation, but they would help you set up supports to hopefully prevent anything serious happening to your child, or help to kind of find the resources that may be beneficial to your child and whatever they're going through. So you've got a parent in your chair in your therapy room and they're starting to notice behaviors. Maybe it's been going on for a little while. What kind of things would you suggest if they were asking, hey, what do I do in this scenario? What should I do? Like, are there some good first steps that can help direct parents, I guess, when they're kind of facing this for the first time?
I mean, I think the obvious first step, which I think most people are already doing, but is worth mentioning is talk with your child, right? You know, and I know that's difficult because some of them might just be completely closed.
Yeah.
But in the last podcast, we talked about the affection and the expectation, behaviors, or actions of a parent. We can come back a little bit to that is, do we smile, right, when we see each other? Am I giving the time of day to check in? Have I started doing that even from a young age so that it's now natural even into teenage years, right? Because then you can at least hear a little bit about and ask about feelings. Again, that's a skill. Not everybody knows how to have deeper conversations or elicit deeper conversations. So right now our kids are young, so I'm just trying to begin the conversation with them by asking them what happened today. So they would talk about the different things that happened. And there's always creative ways to ask that kind of question. What made you happy? What was exciting? Did you have fun? What was recess like? Right? Like those are trying to get them to talk about events. Then sometimes I would just ask them, and what did that make you feel?
Yeah.
And modeling the language of feelings. When my kids are going through some anger, I would say, can you tell me what you're feeling right now? Right.
Yeah.
And so that's, again, I'm just helping them to learn the language. Or I might say, is it anger or is it sadness? So we're teaching them how to express feelings and meaning, right? Like, depending on the maturity of the child, what does this mean to you that you're feeling this way? So that's the basics of having a conversation with your child so that you actually know what's going on with them.
And that's especially important when they're young. But like you said, they hit adolescence and
they might just
I've heard
hide.
people say it's a roll of a dice. You don't exactly know how it's going to go, right? They might be incredibly moody or a whole lot of things can happen.
Well, you know what's so interesting though? I've had this conversation with a mom and her teenage adult children. We were just talking about how you have to renegotiate the relationship as you go into different phases. I think when your child is between 0 and 5, there's a certain kind of relationship you have with them. But then they start really maturing in their concepts of the world. And so it shifts between 6 to 12 or maybe even 11, because a lot of kids are starting to make the transition in grade 7, I think. And so grade 7 through 18 is another season, and then beyond that is another season, and then they start going into adulthood and parenting themselves, and that's another season too. So you have to sometimes even formally renegotiate that unspoken change that happened. This was the advice I had for the mom who had an adult child now. I said, just tell them, I'm trying to be a good parent to you. And I know that there's the temptation to be overbearing or to be not attentive enough. And so I need to know from you that in this particular season, what is the best type of parenting you need from me? So when they're older, especially in adulthood, that's an easier conversation to have. Because they're self-aware enough to know what they actually need from you. And so you're giving them the respect to ask.
But I think even teens can start having that awareness, right?
Yes.
And ownership. And almost, in some cases, there's almost a resentment from teens if they feel like they're struggling with something and they feel like their mom's in on their business. You know what I mean? They want that sense of privacy. It's something developmentally that they crave.
Yes.
Then they feel like you are overreaching.
Yeah. So I look forward to doing this because I haven't experienced it yet. But when our children turn 12 or 13, I want to do almost like a rite of passage with them to really signify the change in our relationship.
Yeah.
To say, you know what? I'm not going to treat you exactly the same way we have been, because you are now getting older and more mature and starting to have your own identity of what it means to be you. And so I'm going to give you a lot more freedoms than I used to give you in autonomy. But I'm also going to expect a little bit more responsibility from you as well, because you're going to become, we obviously want to train them along the way, but you're going to become more of a contributor to the household as well, as long as you're still living with us. Having that kind of reframing with the child would give you an idea of how they want to talk about their mental health. Some teenagers are really good at that. To say 100%, I'm so thankful that you want to talk to me about it. In fact, I want extra help, and they would look for it, right? And they'd be open to it. And some are just, they really don't, they just want you to leave them alone. And I don't know how much of that is good. I'm not sure. That's really up to the situation.
Yeah, absolutely. We're speaking to parents of teens because that is the bulk of our clientele here. We have a lot of teens coming in, and it's just by nature of being teenagers, developmentally, there's a lot going on, right? There's peer pressure coming in. So there's lifestyle choices happening, substance use. There's that deep craving of friendship, that deep craving of autonomy, right? So there's so much going on that a lot of times teens can struggle through that. And it's why we're here professionally to help teens. But then, speaking to the parents of teens, we're here to help you too. This is always our slogan here, is that it's so hard. It's so hard. And I've talked to moms of teens, just friends, and they've said, you know what? We're finding ourselves in places with parenting that we never expected to be, right? Our kids are into everything, and we're trying to figure out how to help them through this so that they land on their feet.
Yeah.
And it's just like nights of tears and stress and worrying about where they are, decisions about, I don't know, for older teens, sometimes they need to be kicked out of the home. And that's a really hard, heart-wrenching thing to do. Our hearts just pour out here. It's really difficult. We're not making light of the very real experiences that people are going through and just how difficult it can be.
I think that the hardest thing to figure out when you're a parent is how much do you control, right? Because there are instances where that's appropriate. If my child is severely addicted to video games, it's my prerogative to cut it off from them till they pick themselves up and figure out there's more to life than that. Will they get mad at us? 100%. But yet we're not just going to sit around and watch them destroy their lives. Right?
Or there's that extreme case that you like to share where there's this man who's 600 pounds and his mother's weeping because she can't make enough food for him, right? But then it's like there is some sense of responsibility as a parent that you are allowing something to happen that is so detrimental to your household, your family, your child, right? And it's literally killing him.
I'm going to say something, again, slightly controversial. All throughout history, children were never elevated to the level that they have been in modern days. Never. The elevation is a good thing because they were treated as property.
Right.
They were really chattels, like kind of like just extras in your life until they become adults that are able to, work at the factory or at the farm kind of thing, right? And so when we got to our modern day, children have been elevated almost to godly status. I'm thinking about, again, this is nothing against all of this. It's a commentary to be thoughtful about. But yeah, like nobody's ever thrown gender reveal parties, right? Up until the last few decades, nobody has all the pictures of your kids wrapped in blankets with the headband, right? Like it's just, there's this just huge elevation of the beauty of childhood, which is in some ways very beautiful and positive.
Right.
The downfall of it, and like all good things, there can be too much of it, I believe. The downfall of it is this elevation of the child becoming the most important thing in the world.
Right.
And so then the temptation is to dote or to over control. People do a disservice to themselves and to their children when they elevate their children's happiness, for example, over everything.
Yeah. Well, and that's where you see in couples counseling a lot of couples struggling because they've spent 18 years plus completely surrounding their life around their children's needs, their sports, their activities, their vacations.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the day, they've drifted from each other because, they haven't prioritized their couple's relationship.
Yes. There was a talk I was listening to, and the lady was talking about how children learn best when they can see the anchor, the support. So like even toddlers, they can see mom's there, but they're allowed to go run off to play in the playground and get hurt and socialize and then run back and there's a safe space again. Yeah, I think that there's a place where over parenting and over giving can actually stifle a child.
Well, you're right. And maybe we're overthinking it.
Maybe.
Maybe it's the luxury we have, right? Yeah. I mean, if you follow history, our grandparents didn't talk about their mental health, for sure. Our parents struggled too. Yes. And now our generation wants to talk about it all the time. We want to talk about our feelings all day long. And technology has allowed us for that time and space to do so. And maybe it's to our detriment.
It's so... I mean, we're living it, so there's no ways to know until we look back in the future almost, right? Like, I'm not suggesting a laissez-faire style either, right? Where it's just like, let things be things because they'll figure it out. So yeah, it's and of course every kid is different too, right? Some kids maybe need a bit more involvement, some less, right?
Yeah.
So very hard to say.
Well, this is a lot of bonus material today, but bringing it back to the conversations that we can have with our children when they're teens, when they're adults, and bringing them into their own mental health planning a little bit.
Yeah.
What might that look like for a teenager, right? If you're saying, hey, I want you to have some ownership of this. I know you're struggling with severe anxiety. Like, how do you want to captain the ship a little bit? And I'm here to support. I'm here to help. I'm going to foot the bill for therapy. But I want you to have some sense of this is my thing.
I'm going to make a suggestion, and I don't think it's easy to do depending on the child, because it depends on how much they're willing to share anyways. But I think I would try to help them navigate their vision for what they want in their mental health.
Yeah.
Or to draw that out from them, because they might be able to open up and say, you know what, like, it's true. I do feel very crummy. And I wish I could laugh more. I wish that I wasn't so bad when it comes to people pleasing. Or, so, I mean, teenagers especially are very smart. They're not very good at self-regulating because they're not mature enough in their brains yet. But they are surprisingly intelligent, understand, and can use words like this. Then I would work backwards, right? It's like, since that's what you want, what are your ideas? What do you think needs to be put in place for you to get to that point? And what can I do to give you all the right resources for that so that you are the champion of your own mental health? That is empowering, I believe, to be able to give that kind of language. Whereas, like, I believe that you want more for yourself, and
I want that for you too.
Exactly, and that's why I'm struggling with this, because I think sometimes kids might be like very nihilistic and just like, no, I don't care.
Exactly.
Right. This is maybe an idealistic kind of suggestion. I mean, it's worth bringing this up. I think if they are looking. Don't force them into therapy. It just doesn't work. It's very frustrating for the therapist and for the child, because they come here and they sit down. They don't want to talk at all. There are cases where I was able to build the rapport with them enough that they finally turned around. But in the most case, they kind of want it before it's worthwhile. And then the other thing, though, is that the moment they're in therapy, you have to recognize that they have now become the sole client of the therapist. And so the therapist is not there to manage your mental health, but your child's mental health.
Right.
I usually start having an understanding when I see a parent being completely overbearing and intrusive and wanting to know what's going on in therapy. Well, you know what? That's exactly how you break trust with the child.
Exactly.
That's probably something that they're struggling with.
I'm glad you brought that up. This is conversations that I have to have with parents too, right? In customer service, they're emailing me saying, the therapist won't tell me what's going on. And I'm like, yeah, that's the law. They have to protect your child's confidentiality. So then one of the ways that we can set you up as a parent for success is managing your expectations of what's happening in that therapy. And the best thing that can happen is for your child to have a confidential space to explore their thoughts and honestly some distance from you as a parent. Like, they need that sense of trust so that they can, whatever feelings they're having, whatever there may be, guilt or shame attached to whatever they're going through. And as long as they have fear that you're going to find out what's happening, they're not going to trust their therapist and open up and talk about those things and work through them, right? So it's actually, counterindicative for the parent to be in on what's happening in the sessions. Right. So that's just like a little prep, I guess, for parents that are considering putting their teen kids into therapy. This is how it's going to go. Your therapist, I mean, if they're giving you notes, they're a bad therapist. There should be no reason for them to break that confidentiality with the child. And there needs to be a sense of trust as a parent that the therapist is holding to their own ethics and the do no harm rule, right? They're working in your child's best interest too, but they are not an extension of your parenting. They're not going to take your parenting, your rules and regulations of your household, and apply them into their therapy sessions.
This is helpful because it's helping me realize why I was talking about the whole elevation of the child. Because when you elevate the child like that, you also elevate your role in that child's development. Now it's my job to do absolutely everything to engineer this child to the best I can. And that's harmful to them. I need to recognize that, children get the most influence from their parents when they're younger. And then they develop the most by getting influence from peers when they are teenagers onward. So a shift happens there where you're not going to be able to influence them the same way you have before. And so you definitely need to trust that there are other positive sources too that can speak into their lives and protect them from the negative source. I hated this when I was a teenager because I thought I was pretty smart by then. I wanted to go to just down the road to the snooker hall, the pool hall, to hang out with my high school friends. And I asked my mom, like I wasn't even asking her. I was just like, hey, Mom, I'm going to take the bike and just go over and hang out with my friends, right? And she's like, no. Like, what do you mean no? And I was probably at least 15 by then, I think. And it was so frustrating for me. But now I recognize that was the breeding ground for my friends for being asked to join gangs. So there is still a level of protecting your child at that age.
Absolutely.
And then once they're 18 and beyond, you kind of have a lot less control at that point.
Right.
You can only speak into it if you have fears and just say, hey, I am concerned, but I also recognize that you're now an adult. Yeah. So you need to make your life choices.
Yeah. And I guess the takeaway for this, for parents managing your own mental health as you're dealing with all the trials and tribulations of teen children, is that managing your expectations is kind of at the forefront of your own mental health. And that can start early on from the moment you have children, realizing that in every season, your role is going to change and be different. And there will be times where you need to be very hands-on, and there will be times where you need to back off a bit. And it's really hard to know when to shift that. And it's especially hard to shift that when you see your child is hurting or struggling, because your instinct says protect them, fix it for them, control it somehow. Like that is our natural desire. And it's because we love our kids, right? It comes back to love again. We want the best for them. We want them to turn out well. I mean, maybe in a selfish way, we want them to reflect well on our family. There's all sorts of layers of what we're experiencing when our children are struggling in their mental health. But yeah, I think we can be proactive. One of the ways that we try and do this is by talking to parents whose kids are in different life stages than ours. And it's sort of a way of preparing us for what's coming up next and giving us, a bit of foreshadowing or a heads up that things could change rather quickly, especially during adolescence. And sometimes you just need to buckle up and, ride the wave. But then maybe they have some good advice for you too. So I think that's where community is just like such an important piece in our mental health.
Yeah, that's so true, because knowing the lay of the land is helpful for deciding how you're going to try to be the best parent you can in your specific context. Like I'm thinking about adult children now, and cultures have such different views on it, right? I'm thinking of more traditional cultures where family is king, right? Like you have multi-generational families, they all stay in the same house. There's still lots of control from parent to child, even into old age. And then you have like other cultures where it's like, can't wait to kick you out of the house.
Finally free.
Right, like that kind of language. I think we want to be wise in all of it to recognize that that's where we're coming from and pay attention to the pros and cons of either, and then figure out what does that look like for us that's healthy and good. I mean, that's my opinion, but I think in most cases, it's probably somewhere in the middle where you do, even as adult children, have some form of tradition and family values with them so that they feel a sense of groundedness in a choppy world. But on the other hand, that you give a little bit of separation and let them figure out things as adults, right?
Absolutely. Give them that autonomy that they're craving. We have a few minutes left. Before we wrap up, I want to spend a few minutes talking about just practical things that parents can kind of put in their back pocket for a rainy day, ways that they can get support when they find themselves in crisis, find their kids in crisis, or if they're starting to notice those patterns, like you were saying, their kid is depressed or anxious for more than 2 weeks, they're starting to see behaviors becoming repetitive. What are ways they can get support sooner than later?
And honestly, you could probably speak better to this as a social worker than I can. I think a good starting point usually is with your family doctor, because they can at least refer to getting assessment and diagnosis, just so that people know, because our practice is full of psychotherapists. We are equipped and allowed by our college to provide psychotherapy, which is the treatment aspect, but not to provide assessments or diagnoses. So that one, you would want to look to your MD, doctors and psychiatrists or clinical psychologists who are equipped and given the permission to do that.
And I guess just as full disclosure, the regulations are kind of always changing and the supports are always changing as far as what's available for mental health resources. But it's worth asking your family doctor if they have access to getting free assessments done. I know a lot of people think that they need to march into a psychologist's office and pay $300 to get an assessment done and be on a wait list for a year before they can do that. But your family doctor might be able to get one using telehealth in as little as 2 weeks. So that's a good little tidbit, I think.
Yeah, this is a special mention as well for younger men who are smoking marijuana. You want to be mindful that they are more susceptible statistically to develop psychosis from that. So if you go to CAMH, they do have things like early psychosis prevention or interventions that's really worthwhile looking into if they are into substances and getting a lot of paranoia.
Yeah.
That you want to deal with this sooner rather than later.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, upstream prevention is always the best way, but sometimes we find ourselves in the middle of it and we're just doing our best, right? It's also worth mentioning that your family doctor is able to prescribe for mental health conditions. Their toolkit as far as what they can offer for mental health is limited, but they do have that prescribing power if that's something that would be recommended or helpful. And that's something that we can't speak to as therapists, but definitely bring your family doctor in on the loop. I think my favorite resource of all is calling 211. So that's available in the Simcoe region. You dial 211 on your phone and it will connect you to an operator who is trained to connect people with health and social services in the area. So they've got a full directory of what is current. If you're in crisis, your child's in crisis, they can call 211 and they do what's called a warm handoff. So they'll stay on the line with you until you're successfully connected with an agent on the crisis helpline. And it's just something that's really easy to remember rather than, a long 10-digit phone number, dialing 211. You can just call them if you have questions even about mental health things, and they have been really helpful. I've called them myself as a therapist when I'm trying to brainstorm things for clients. They're just really a good resource.
Yeah, and if there's a high degree of vulnerability or danger for self-harm, if there's a plan or an attempt, you would want to bring your child to the emergency at the hospital.
Yeah, you sense immediate harm for yourself or for your child, dial 911. Like first responders, they're trained to deal with those like extreme crises. Yeah, I think better safe than sorry. Well, Lindsay, thank you for coming in and diving into some of the tough stuff. Kind of makes your head spin a little bit, right? When you're thinking about just the hard things that parents are going through and some of the challenges that kids are facing these days. Things that we didn't have to face when we were teens. But all that to say, there's help, there's hope, there are resources available. We're here to help. And if you have questions about what you've heard on the air, if you have topics that you want us to discuss, again, you can email us at resetberry@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time on Beyond the Session.